Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Gittin. We are up to Perek Mishna Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana ben Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Le'avdil ben Chaim Lechaim, v'derefua Shenemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, B'tor Shah Chulei Israel. The Mishnah lists cases where the rabbis decreed that a creditor can collect only from the debtor's available unsold properties and not from land that he sold. En motzin la'achilat perot v'lishvach karkaot v'limzon ha'isha v'abanot. We may not collect payments for the eating of produce, or for the improvement of land, or for the food of a man's wife and daughters. Minichasim mishubadim, from sold properties. Rather, we may collect these payments only from the debtor's available properties. The first case, eating of produce, refers to a case where someone had stolen a field, sold it to another person, and the buyer had grown produce in it. The field was then discovered to have been stolen, and the owner took it back with its produce from the buyer. The buyer can go back to the seller, the thief, and recover his losses, the field and the produce. When the land was sold, a contract was written that promised the buyer that if the field were stolen and the real owner takes it from him, the thief must compensate the buyer for his loss. When the owner takes back his field, he does not have to compensate the buyer for anything except whatever money the buyer had spent on planting and improving the field. The owner is not required to pay for the field itself and the produce he yielded, since they are his. And even if the buyer had already eaten produce of the land, he must pay the owner its value. The buyer can then demand the value of the field and produce from the thief. The Mishnah teaches that although the buyer can take the thief's sold properties as payment for the value of the field, he can collect only the thief's available properties as payment for the produce. Although the Mishnah said the eating of the produce, which refers to produce the buyer already ate for which he must pay the original owner, the Mishnah's ruling applies to the uneaten produce as well. The second case, improvement of land, also refers to stolen land that someone bought from the thief. If the buyer made improvements to the stolen field, for example, he planted trees in the field or fertilized the soil, the same applies if the value of the land went up by itself, for example, due to inflation. So again, if the buyer made improvements to the stolen field that increased its value and then the owner took the field back, the buyer can collect the value of the improvement from the thief. Even if the buyer caused an increase in the field's value that is greater than his expenses, the owner doesn't have to pay the owner only has to pay the buyer for his expenses and not for the increased value. The buyer is then entitled to take the difference between the expenses and the field's increased value from the thief. This payment too can be collected only from the thief's available properties and not from his sold properties. And the third case, food of the wife and daughters, refers to the support a man's wife and daughters can collect from his estate after his death. This is one of the conditions of the Ketubah document. This too may be taken only from the available properties of the estate and not from properties that were sold. This applies whether the husband sold the properties in his lifetime or the heirs sold them after his death. In either case, the widow and daughters may not take them to pay for their support. The rabbis made these enactments for the benefit of society. All these payments have no set amount. In the case of the stolen field, it is impossible to predict how much produce will grow in the possession of the buyer or how much the field will increase in value. And in the case of the widow and daughters, there are no predictable limits to the food and living expenses that must be provided to them. And therefore, if they were to be collected from the property that debtors sold to others, people would not be willing to buy land for fear of losing it as payment for an earlier obligation. Another enactment for the benefit of society, if someone finds lost property and returns it to the owner, and the owner claims that the finder did not return everything that was lost, but kept part for himself, the finder does not have to swear to the owner that he returned all of it. Without this enactment, there would be certain situations where even a finder must take an oath. For example, if the owner accuses the finder of keeping 100 shekels of the money he had found for himself, and the finder admits to keeping 50 shekels but denies the other 50, biblical law would require the finder to take the oath of a modeh b'miksat, one who admits part of a claim. The rabbis decreed that even in a case of this type, where the oath is biblically required, the finder is believed without an oath. This enactment was made for the benefit of society so that a person who finds lost property will not refrain from returning it out of concern that the owner will make him swear that he had returned everything. And that is in a Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Dal discusses more enactments that the rabbis made for the benefit of society. Yitomim shesamchu etzel baal habayit. If orphans relied on a householder to be the administrator who manages their affairs, or shemina le'en avien apotropos, or if their father before his death appointed an administrator for them. Now a person becomes a legal administrator, an apotropos of orphans' affairs, either by being appointed by their father before his death or by being appointed by the court. The Mishnah's first case, the householder, concerned someone who was not officially appointed by anyone, rather he was close to the orphans and they relied upon him to attend to their affairs. The Mishnah teaches that even he is considered their administrator. Now, although the Mishnah mentions only an administrator appointed by the father or by the orphans themselves, its ruling certainly applies to one appointed by the court. Chayav la'aser perotehem, the administrator is obligated to tithe their produce, to separate tirumah and maaser, so that they do not eat forbidden produce. The orphans who are minors cannot separate tirumah and maaser on their own because the tithing performed by a minor is not valid, as it says in Tirumot, chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Therefore, the administrator is responsible for tithing all of the produce that grew in the orphans' fields in Eretz Yisrael to make it permissible to be eaten. Although the orphans are minors, they must be protected from sin, as the Rambam writes in Chut Nachlaot, chapter 11, Halakha 9. Now, technically, only the adult owner of the produce or his agent can separate tirumah and maaser from his produce. However, since the orphans are minors and cannot tithe their produce themselves, the rabbis transferred the ownership of the produce to the administrator so that he can tithe it for them. Another enactment that concerns an administrator of orphans' affairs, apotropos sheminao avi tomim shava. An administrator who was appointed by the orphans' fathers to manage their affairs must swear to the orphans when they reach adulthood that he did not keep any of their property for himself. Even though the orphans have no definite claim against the administrator, the rabbis impose this oath on him, as says in Shavuot chapter 7, Mishnah 8, so that people will not suspect him of taking advantage of the orphans, and also to calm any concerns the orphans might have about his trustworthiness. Minao bedin lo yishava. But if the court appointed him as administrator, he does not have to swear. A person who was asked by a father to be his children's administrator would not take the position unless the father had done him some kindness. Since he has this motivation, he will not be deterred by the fact that he will eventually have to take an oath. However, someone appointed by the court might refuse to take the position because of the oath. The rabbis therefore decreed that the oath is not imposed on an administrator appointed by the court. A dissenting opinion, Abba Shaul says, Chiluf advarim. The reverse of these rulings is true, meaning an administrator appointed by the court must swear, but an administrator appointed by the father does not need to swear. Abba Shaul reasons that since a person benefits from being appointed by the court, because he thereby earns a reputation as a trustworthy person, he will not refrain from accepting the position because of the oath. However, an administrator appointed by the father gains nothing. According to this Tana Abba Shaul, an administrator appointed by the father accepts the position out of love and friendship toward the father, not because the father had given him some benefits. So since he gains nothing, he might refrain from taking the position if he has to swear. Now, the Mishnah deals with cases in which the orphans do not have a definite claim against the administrator. If they do have a definite claim, all Tanim agree that the administrator must swear, regardless of who appointed him. The Rav does tell us, V'alakha ka'Abba Shaul, the Halakha follows the opinion of Abba Shaul. Now, the next rabbinic enactment concerns payment for damage that is not physical, not tangible. Hamtameh, if someone makes another person's food tameh, for example, the person himself is tameh and he touched tirumah, or he placed an object that is tameh on tirumah, even a kohen is forbidden to eat tirumah that is tameh. Vamdameh, or if he mixes tirumah into another person's ordinary produce, if tirumah is mixed into ordinary unsanctified food, the entire mixture must be treated like tirumah and may be eaten only by kohanim, unless the tirumah is less than 1/100th of the chulin of the ordinary food, in which case the tirumah is nullified. The owner therefore suffers a loss because he must now sell the entire mixture to a kohen for the price of tirumah, which is very low. Tirumah costs much less than ordinary produce because there is little demand for it in view of the fact that it may be eaten only by kohanim and only when the kohen is tahor and the tirumah is tahor. Vamnasech, or if he makes another person's wine forbidden by mixing it with wine that was poured before an idol, it is biblically forbidden to drink or have any other benefit from wine that was used as libation, a liquid poured as an offering for idol worship, as it speaks about in Masechet Avodah Zarah, chapter 2, Mishnah 3. The Mishnah refers to someone who mixed the prohibited wine with someone else's kosher wine and made the mixture forbidden. Items offered before idols, such as sacrifices and wine, libations, can never be nullified, even if they are mixed together with much larger amounts of permissible items. B'shogeg patur, the law is that if he damaged the item unknowingly, he is exempt from payment. Now, either he did not know the halachic status of the items involved, tamer, tahor, terumah, chulin, forbidden or permissible wine, or he did not know that what he did with them would make them forbidden, again, he is exempt from payment. B'mizid chayav. But if he damaged it knowingly, he is obligated to pay. The Torah requires one to pay only for damage that can be seen and not for damage of this type, which cannot be seen. However, if he caused even this type of damage knowingly, the rabbis punished him by requiring him to pay. The rabbis impose this penalty for the benefit of society so that people will be deterred from causing even non-physical damage, but they did not penalize those who cause such damage unknowingly, although in the case of physical damage, one must pay even if he caused it accidentally. A similar enactment, a Kohanim shepiglu b'mikdash, regarding Kohanim who disqualified someone's offering as pigul. Pigul is an offering that is disqualified because the Kohen who performed any of its 4 essential services, slaughtering the animal, receiving its blood, carrying the blood to the altar, and applying the blood to the altar, had in mind while doing so that the offering will be eaten or burned after the set time for these activities. Zidin chayevin, if they did so knowingly, meaning the Kohen knew that his improper intentions would disqualify the offering, they intended to disqualify the offering, they're obligated to pay the owner of the offering. As an offering that became pigul is invalid and not credited to its owner as fulfillment of his obligation. Since the owner must now bring a new offering to replace the one that became pigul, the Kohen has to pay for the loss of the disqualified offering. And even in a case where the owner is not obligated to replace his offering, meaning he vowed to bring only this specific animal, he still suffers a loss because it is disturbing to him that the animal he wanted to bring before God can no longer be offered. The Kohen must therefore pay the value of the disqualified offering so that the owner can buy a new one and fulfill his desire. And here too, although the damage was not physical, the rabbis enacted for the benefit of society that the Kohen must pay so that other Kohanim will not do the same. However, since the damage is not physical, if the Kohen disqualified the offering unknowingly, he is exempt from paying. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.